Yes, sir. So it's 3 o'clock, and well, time for us to begin. Good afternoon, and welcome to the fourth of the panel discussions we are having on the problems and issues of online teaching. This is the fourth panel discussion of this discussion forum for online teaching, or DFOT. DFOT is an informal getting together of teachers from across India who are coping in their own ways with the issues of online teaching. As we all have recognized now, the online world is not flat. It's very corrugated, it's very rugged, and it's very unequal. There are some obvious inequalities, and those are just that different people have different amounts of access to the internet. But beyond that, institutions have differential access to the internet, and different subjects are finding different challenges in trying to communicate online. So in the last few weeks, we've done a number of these online discussions and workshops. We started out addressing the simple issue of how do you get your students to remain engaged with you for an hour during a class, because our classes are usually quantized as 1 hour slots, but how do you keep them engaged? In the next discussion, we looked at how do you evaluate teaching online. That is to say, how do you have online examinations, and how do you evaluate online teaching? The third of our panel discussions was to try to understand the role of the administration. The administration's job is not just to tell us to teach online. They're supposed to make it easier for us to do that, and make it easier also for students to learn online. If you're going to force us to go online, then what is the enabling mechanisms? And this one is the fourth, where we started examining, or we're thinking of examining questions that have to do with practice, the practice of different topics. So we started out with this following question: how does one teach humanities subjects? I know that there's a range of different types of disciplines that we do have. It's not, again, not a flat academic space, but still, many of the humanities subjects share common difficulties in online teaching, and what we thought would be nice to hear from practitioners from across the country. As in all our panel discussions, we are trying to get a range of opinions, and this range is represented today by Professor Shukla Sawant, who is from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and she teaches there in the School of Arts and Aesthetics. And we also have Professor Giridhar Rao from the Azim Premji University, who teaches English literature. Professor Asim Siddiqui from Aligarh Muslim University, also teaching English. Professor Manoj Maji from the IIT Guwahati, where he teaches in the Department of Design, but specifically he runs a center for creativity. And finally, we have Dr. Meera Bayendur, who teaches philosophy at Manipal University, or in Jaipur, if that's right. Okay, so we will sort of more or less go in this order, and what I request you all to do is to share your feelings, opinions, what have you, but not open-ended. Please share them for about 10 or 12 minutes and try to address some of these issues. Like I was telling you all informally, this particular discussion will have a life beyond today from 3 to 4 or 4:30. This will be, it's already on YouTube, but it will also be recorded and made available for people to see and come back to. So if you have tips, if you have special, some good practices that you feel are working for you and your class, maybe there is somebody else who can learn something from it. And so with this, let me now welcome Shukla, my erstwhile colleague at JNU, right? And I'd like to hear from you as to what your views are on this topic. Shukla.
So thank you, Professor Ramaswamy, and thank you everybody else. It's indeed, very useful to have these kind of discussions. We have had a very difficult time trying to teach online since the pandemic began. But I'd like to clarify that on the one hand, we've already been teaching for the longest time through reproductions, digitized forms of dispersion of material. Our lectures are largely PowerPoints. Those who teach cinema, for instance, teach using cinema clips, which are uploaded on computers, etc. The kind of work that is shown in theater and performance studies classes are also recordings, video recordings, etc. of material. But when students are in one location, in one place, where the rain is even, in some sense at least, to access, it's a little easier. And in any case, all this kind of teaching is also supplemented through field visits. It's also supplemented by taking students to performances. Our cinema studies classes have always been held in an auditorium to replicate the ambience of a cinema viewing context. Because we know that the cinema studies is not just about the narrative of the film, but it's also about a whole network of distributive systems, the way material is received. The same goes with the visual arts and theater and performance. Now we've come to this situation where students are dispersed across geographical locations with different forms of access, different, situations, physical situations within which they can also access this kind of material. So it's almost impossible to take live classes. Because we also know that the kind of situations that students find themselves in is where they've had to actually contribute economically to the household income when members in the household will have lost jobs, etc. It has made the situation for them very difficult. So by and large, the kind of teaching that we have done is either in the form of exchanging readings or sending out readings, maybe doing occasional group discussions, or just preparing lectures and then allowing students to download the material and then study from it as and when they have time. So it's effectively been a kind of a flexi time kind of teaching environment. But there are some very fundamental issues that I think we haven't addressed, because I think during the course of this whole thing, we have probably broken every single copyright law. Because if you look at the kind of material that you have to upload, whether it's readings, whether it is images, etc., are we really going to be depending on museums that have public access? No, because a lot of the material that we teach is obviously material that sometimes we may have collected on our own. There is no assurance from the university administration, etc., regarding what happens to this material that we are uploading and distributing to students. We also don't know what kind of surveillance systems that have been put into place that might be used for all kinds of political persecution later, because we do know that you discuss all kinds of things in a classroom. I would think that the classroom is one space where anything and everything should be allowed to be discussed. And I keep telling people from the sciences that you have to understand that just like you have laboratories where sometimes very dangerous kind of germs and all kinds of things are also discussed, you should also have that same kind of space to allow all kinds of ideas in the social sciences and the humanities to be discussed. Instead of, trying to say that this is not possible or this is possible, you should not think. So surveillance has become a huge issue for us. Now, there's another very important issue that we haven't really discussed at all, which is that when you send material into somebody's home, you are actually penetrating a personal space. suppose there is material. So, for example, some person is discussing a very violent scene in cinema, right? Which is full of blood and gore. It may be an adulterated film that's being discussed because of some particular kind of a context. It needs to be discussed in class. You're discussing science, Silence of the Lambs, for example. You are actually taking this material, which is X-rated or adult thing, but you're taking it into an environment when you don't know where your room is going to be, when a small child is going to walk in, or somebody, who might find that content objectionable is going to walk in, right? So how do you actually deal with these kind of situations is really something that not many people are talking about at all. Now, there's the other issue of teaching, of evaluation, I think, and also setting exams, etc., which for most of us, the solution has been to set take-home assignments. Because, in the humanities, there is no one answer to anything. So when you say that this, you can create multiple choice questions for even entrance tests, we have vehemently objected to that because, a person may say that all of the above are wrong and I have my own opinion. And, that's what a research mind is actually supposed to do. In the humanities, there is no one answer. Yeah. Exactly. So that's precisely the point, that when they ask us to set multiple choice questions and say that, you have to tick either or this or that, that really becomes completely impossible for us to do. And so by and large, our teaching has been in the form of asking students to do take-home assignments. But there's the other issue, which is that people are differently able technologically as well. Somebody who's in the 70s or 80s may have a vast pool of knowledge. We may wish to appoint somebody like that as the examiner for a PhD thesis. And that person does not have a clue how to run, Skype or whatever. So are we going to say that we're going to restrict our pool of examiners and research advisors to only those people who can access technology? That leaves out a huge pool of people who have never engaged with technology at all, right? And so that is something that I don't think there is, for example, somebody like A.K. Das sitting in Shantiniketan, where there is such poor connectivity, but one of the finest Mughal scholars. If we want to call him as an examiner, we can't do it because he does not know how to use Skype. He doesn't have, easy thing to computers. It does not have a thing to computer technology. So these are just some of the issues that we have been grappling with, we have been dealing with. And the thing is that during the pandemic, I understand that students are not going to be able to go out at all. I've been hearing all kinds of complaints from them about not being able to get on with their research work, which is a huge issue because they cannot access archives, they cannot go out into the field and document the material that they wish to. And so most of the projects have actually ended up becoming a kind of a historiographical project where people are only looking at material that's already existing and then doing an analysis of that. So we are pretty much looking at the next 2 years as being very, very difficult for research scholars who have to go out into the field and document or have to access archives, etc. And I'd also like to say something about the unevenness of the way archives themselves are organized. If you go to the Metropolitan Museum website, you go to the museums in the West, there's a huge body of material. There's a great deal of really excellent digital, most of the material has been archived, but just go have a look at the way our museums are dealing with this material, The archives are in a really, really shoddy state, and, it just limits the kind of archive that you might access. We also have various, it's actually very easy to also limit yourself then to, what is available to you through English language, right? So, for example, a lot of our students who may be, for example, wanting to study the Far Eastern arts, etc., We know that, the Chinese have their own web space. They don't even, there's hardly any interaction between the English language, the internet space, and the Chinese language, Baidu or whatever, their search engine, etc. So much of the material does not even come up when you're trying to do search, when you're trying to search for material in museums in China, Japan, Russia, etc., because they operate within separate language spheres. The internet itself is divided. I think that's again something that we need to really account for. So I've already taken 10 minutes, and I think I've laid out some of the broad problems, and I think I'll hand over this piece.
Okay, thank you very much, Shukla. I mean, I mean, some of the things that you have said actually have not come up in discussion before. This issue of having a very divided linguistics, internet. I mean, we tend to think that Hindi or Indian languages don't have access to the internet, and somehow this business that scholarship is there in different languages, international languages, and huge amounts of scholarship. So how would you actually access it? I think this is extremely important. Thank you for highlighting some of these issues, and I guess we will come back to it. There'll be questions and so on and so forth. All right. So, and that is the JNU experience, right? So now we'll switch down to, I'm just going in the order in which the names were listed on the flyer. So the next in our list is Professor Giridhar Rao from the Azim Premji University. Giridhar, he teaches English and at least one more course that he mentioned in his email to me, which I have now forgotten. But our concern was how does one teach English or language when one is on one side of a screen, as Shukla also brought out, sometimes the classroom itself is the arena. So not having your students in one classroom and not being able to gauge their reactions, that is also a bit of an issue, but that is true for all subjects. So with that, Giri, would you please have your 10-12 minutes of...
Sure. Am I speaking, is my speaking volume okay?
Brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Entirely appropriately, until 45 minutes ago, I had no internet today. So that was the shared issue. And equally importantly, this week is the International World Teachers Day week as well. Tomorrow is the World Teachers Day. So it's entirely appropriate we reflect on these questions today here. I wanted to share a screen, but it looks like Madhurima, there are two Giridhars there should be two Giridhars in the list of participants.
Yeah.
So the laptop is not.
Your twin is supposed to do it? No.
Done. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. So. Yeah, I hope it's visible.
Yeah.
So, as you said, the area of humanities is huge. So I'll stick to literature just for just quickly going over some of the thoughts that struck me. To do with basically selection of material, online pedagogy, the issue at our university, but not only our university, developing various resources, and ending with a, since it is a literature, with a poem. The length of readings, in a previous episode of this discussion, someone mentioned that about 50 to 75% of the face-to-face content, only that much is we can transact in an online mode. That seems to be true. So substantial reduction of what material one can bring to the classroom is the result of this online mode. As the previous speaker mentioned, Professor Sawant mentioned, the availability of non-English texts online is also an issue in a multilingual India. The institutional response, as she rightly pointed out, was a copyright one, but also more mechanics of it, light in terms of weight, in terms of light, but good quality scans, which are both searchable and annotatable. These are things that the institution needs to make available on a large scale for all courses and all students, right? Multiple formats for multiple devices. I'll come back at the end to a couple of initiatives that seem to be addressing it. The translations initiative at Azim Premji University and the National Translation Mission at CII, Central Institute of Indian Languages in Mysuru. The pedagogy, as far as pedagogy is concerned, the constraints are familiar, and many in the previous episodes have spoken about various constraints and quite briefly, so I won't rehearse that. But once again, what emerged from the previous episodes also was that there needs to be an institutional response, which is both technological and an administration, as Venu mentioned previous episode, of an administration that sees this as a collaborative challenge and addresses it. As far as classroom strategies are concerned, I don't see anything specific about teaching literature that is not a challenge for people, other humanities subjects or the social sciences. One challenge, however, is that literary texts are less amenable to sort of bullet point summaries, because what is important is also how it is said, not just what is said. You need to take the text into the class. Redefining it as or repackaging it as a bullet point simply doesn't work as well. So since much less material can be transacted, there would be fewer what might be called close readings of poems or essays or whatever. Right? But on the other hand, the fact that you are using the online mode means that with a little digging around, you can probably get the poet's rendition of that poem or a singing of that poem, such as there is one of Shakespeare's Song of 18, which has been sung beautifully by Gilman. Many more online resources are available. So as far as online pedagogy goes, the constraints are familiar, but the challenge is really that it is a literary text. In the Azim Premji University, we don't have a literature department as such. We have these education, development, policy, and governance. So a course like teaching Hindi language and literature in schools, which my colleague Manoj is offering, is an elective. So students do that. So in that sense, that's a positive, that there is more motivation for them to engage with the texts and the ideas in the class. However, the challenge is that since this is not a literature department, these are social science students, applied social sciences, who are going to work in the development sector broadly. Very few read for pleasure. It's a part of their make profile, language profile. So they're not comfortable with long text, certainly not in English. So even those who do read for pleasure read in Malayalam, perhaps. Not necessarily in English. So hardly any background in literary studies. So that puts down the idea of transaction, because there's no prior preparation that we can rely on in a class of 40 or 20 or whatever. I'm teaching courses, one with 20 students and the other with 44 students. So that's a bit of a challenge there. I mentioned developing resources of various kinds. Here's a couple of initiatives. The translations initiative of the university is translating all the readings into Kannada and Hindi to start with, Hindi and Kannada, making them available to students, to our students. So that makes it available, the material available, both primary and secondary readings or additional reading, over a much wider set of students. The other initiative is the National Translation Mission of the Government of India, of the Central Institute of Indian Languages. Remarkable initiative of identifying knowledge text in multiple in multiple disciplines. And, they've identified 63, something like that, 70 disciplines. And in those, they're translating, they've built a network of translators to translate these knowledge texts, which are undergraduate textbooks already approved by the UGC, into all 22 official languages of India. So material in sciences and social sciences is being made available in multiple languages. Do look it up. It's quite a remarkable project. So secondary text available in multiple languages is an ongoing project, but the challenge continues to be of institutional arrangements to make these accessible. This is a talk on online mode and engaging with literature on an online mode. A 1998 poem I thought might be a good way to end, by Jeffrey McDaniel, called "The Quiet World," which explores quite intimately the link between language and identity and silence. The quiet world. In an effort to get people to look at each other's eyes more, the government has decided to allot each person exactly 167 minutes a day. When the phone rings, I come here without alert. In the restaurant, I point. I'm adjusting well to the new way. Late at night, I call my long-distance lover, proudly say, I only used 59 today. I say, when she doesn't respond, I know she's used up all her. So, I love you. After that, we just sit on the line to each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giridhar. Could you unshare yourself? Yeah. Thanks, Giridhar. But in a sort of an ironic way, your audio was so intermittent and fragmented as we were hearing. This sort of brings home the difficulty, because it's such a beautiful poem. And I used up more than 59 of my own in trying to get it. I'm going to go back and read it. But this, I think, a lot of what we talk about theoretically comes home to roost as we are talking. Bangalore, Azim Premji, anybody would laugh if you said that they have internet problems, right? Mr. Wipro himself, right? And how does one, the reality may be very different, all right? You may not be sitting inside Wipro headquarters, but I dare say even inside Wipro headquarters, you could have connectivity issues and problems. Madhurima, who teaches at a central university, has had umpteen power cuts today. And this is a central university, right? And let's not even go where JNU is. And I have come from home to my office because I'm sure that at least at IIT Delhi there will be uninterrupted power and uninterrupted internet connectivity. But thank you very much, Giridhar. Many of the issues that you highlighted are very relevant. The non-humanities people would say that there is one element which maybe we've not explicitly cared about before. We tend to feel that people in humanities and social sciences look for a lot more interaction and a lot more feedback from their students in real time. And that was, somewhere that was one of the things that was playing in my mind of which, what are the issues of online teaching in the humanities. Now we'll switch gears a little and go to another IIT Guwahati, where Professor Manoj Maji teaches the Department of Design. Manoj, are you on? I don't quite see you.
I don't see him.
Is he there?
No. No, I think so. He's not here.
No, we just had a long discussion with Manoj, but that is Guwahati for you, and in addition to location, I guess location, that's one of the big problems of the Northeast. So, for the moment, let me just, we'll come back to Manoj when he is back online with us. And let's switch now to Meera Bendur, who teaches philosophy in Jaipur at the Manipal University there. I'm probably getting all sorts of things wrong, but Meera teaches philosophy, and we're very happy to have the perspective of somebody who discusses ideas. How does one teach it to a blank screen? Or what would Socrates have done? Right. So Meera.
So thank you very much, everyone. And I'm sharing today not from my, I've just joined the job about a week ago here in Manipal. Manipal, as you know, is a big company-led university, and it has, like my office also has power backup and internet. I'm at home today, but I'm going to share my experience of teaching in a state university. I was teaching philosophy in the Bangalore Central University, which is the state university, the now old Bangalore University of the very infamous background. Professor Jaffet was a VC, and the thing is, I had only 5 MA philosophy students, and they were in their 4th semester. And this is like the last batch of philosophy, because philosophy is almost closing down there, or being suspended for the next few years. So my students are a very strange set of students. There are 2 who are modern and come from city backgrounds, and 3 of my students are from the rural areas. One is a part-time lawyer, the other is a part-time activist and Dalit activist, the third one is in the Ambedkar side. So I had a very interesting little India, in terms of religion also, they were well distributed. And so I had many of them would come to already when we were doing classes on campus itself, many of them, I had to struggle to fit my classes so that they could go home after 2 o'clock and work in their second job. So because it was philosophy and I was given a free reign of the department, we managed to adjust our actual...
Sorry, could you speak a little louder or closer to the mic?
Okay, I'll speak louder. Okay. So I hope I'm not echoing, I'm in an empty house. So basically we had to adjust the classes to their work schedule. So what actually happened in my experience was a reversal. Because I started teaching online, the attendance was higher. All 5 of them turned up for all the classes. But an interesting thing is that we had to adapt a lot. I'm speaking from my experience because everyone has spoken about the problems, but I would like to point out some interesting things that happened to me, which kind of gave me hope, because my students are very jugaad people. They have been struggling their entire life and they know to work around things, and they actually have been my teachers during this time. The first thing that happened was when we met for the first class, they all said, "Madam, you are Akashvani and we are your listeners. So it's okay if we can't see your face, as long as you do it like a radio program, we'll be happy." And whenever we want to, so we were on a Zoom or luckily the university didn't say we have to use Teams or Zoom or whatever. So I put in a Google Classroom and loaded videos and loaded all the things. They learned to operate the Google Classroom. And then what they did was, every time there was a problem, they would phone in their questions through WhatsApp. So I'll be like a TV program person, and I will pick up their phone and say, so Manoj is saying this, so I'm going to say this reply. So it was a very Akashvani program. I felt like a radio jockey. literally, though I was doing a philosophy class, it was a kind of a radio jockey situation, which everybody enjoyed. And so Naveen actually told me, or Akashwani, and that set off a kind of a very positive note. There were trouble, and I'm really surprised because there was one day when Naveen had to move from Bangalore to his village. The other thing they started saying is, why, madam, we are thinking we are in different places. We are all in fact, I'm using the English they use. We are all inside the computer, ma'am. We'll bring all places in computer. So every class would begin with them video showing the surrounding, the location where they are. One was sitting on top of a hillock because the network was good there. Another was in this little house with goats tied on one side. He says, I'm in the goat shed because nobody will disturb me here. I mean, compared to the amount of complaining that I hear from my elite students from Manipal, these students were willing to go and get what I'm teaching to them. Also because perhaps the course was very interesting. I was teaching a philosophy of the feminism and subaltern. We were doing Ambedkar, we were doing Jyotiba Phule. So I guess they were very enthusiastic. And the other course was philosophy of art and aesthetics, which is very interesting. So we were able to show them paintings. And so the other thing that I also did was try to avoid the complications of technology. So if I wanted to show them a picture, I will not share screen because that's a complication. So I just pick up something and do this, right? So it was a very simple, so I would write something on it and show it. So I am not dealing with a dozen buttons, so I became a performer. So then somebody said, madam, you channa dress markon mani, please come very nicely dressed. Face galla channage bottalla itko mani, keep all the bindi and all and come because we are looking at your face. We would like to see a pleasant face. And it was said in a jocular way, but I got it. Then I realized that we are actually performing for the students. In some sense, pedagogy of performance was happening. And this is perhaps one of the reasons is philosophy also relies on text, but philosophy relies on thinking. So the heartbeat that I got from them, one was through the mode of anytime anybody would go off the video, there was a WhatsApp call that they could log on to. I was keeping my phone open so they could hear my voice through WhatsApp. So it was like whatever happened, the connection between us will not go. And the way they were responding back was they were allowed to interrupt me. There was no one-way communication. A lot of times fights broke on in the, basically I think, who was on the Constitution Committee? Somebody said only Ambedkar was there and there were 14 other people and somebody, that fight broke out on my classroom. So I didn't find it in a class you're able to see when the students are distracted and they fall asleep. At least here, I could at least see the active ones. So it was kind of encouraging for me. Yeah, the usual discouragements, the bad connections, the inaccessibility, madam data, I'm not, my data is finished, I'm not coming. And the other thing was, as I'm doing now, I shifted languages. So what did I do for the absence of philosophy text in Kannada? Philosophy is one of the least translated texts, especially Western philosophy texts. So what I would do is there is something called audio recording in WhatsApp. It's like an asynchronous conversation. So I would put on the thing, and as I'm reading the text, I would try and read it out in Kannada. Like I would do I wouldn't bother about the niceties of translation, not bother with the philosophical problems of translation. So it was not a theoretical translation, but a practical translation. And I would go on talking about it. If I didn't get a word, I would say, any of you know this word for this? So one of my students actually told me what the word for subaltern is in Kannada. It's called Prati Samskriti, which is interesting because coming from their background, they also found videos and they were allowed to upload that. So it is that the democratic space of pedagogy was more open because they were allowed to be teachers and learners both. And they were allowed to take charge of their learning the way they did. And it was very interesting the way we did the exam. We were not allowed to change the assignment code and all. We were given very strict instructions that it had to be a closed book kind of exam. So I told them that we created an exam WhatsApp group. So at 9 o'clock, I will photograph the question paper and transmit it to them. and wait for 3 hours. At the end of 3 hours, they would photograph their answers, written sheets, and send it back to me as photographs. I have archived those photographic exam sheets because one of the other ways I try to overcome the way we do the exams is by giving them thinking questions, which cannot be copied from anywhere. So questions were, how do you make the university a gender-safe space for girls, or something like that, which requires a little more of their own thinking and allowing them to do. And the other thing that was very successful was presentations, because they got to be the spotlight, they got to be like a center show, and we recorded them and we sent them the movie of their presentation, which they showed everyone and said, we are on TV or whatever. We created a small logo to go with there was a Zoom background, like today's presentation is by Naveen, blah, blah, blah. And so it kind of enthused them to also do this. So these were some of the things that we managed in the class. But the most interesting thing that actually happened was that because the students themselves said, this is not new, madam. I said, how come it's not new? Pandemic is new, online teaching is new. Madam, distance learning nali ide agate. This is what happens in distance learning. So distance learning, I have done a distance learning MA degree from Annamalai University. And I know that for 10 days we went and did that compacted course of teaching. But for me, this was that model, a distance learning model. And whenever I talk to my colleagues, I found that a few of them had never talked to their colleagues who were doing distance learning. Distance learning departments in various universities, whether it's Indira Gandhi Open University or other open universities, nobody calls those people to ask them, what are you doing? How do you do your exams? How do you do your things, right? So I know the final exam is a problem, but they did have assignments, they did have all this by post thing. Of course, post got shut down. The moment the post started working, then I was suggesting that we send materials by post. But it was a little bit of a problem. The university had no funds. So I think learning from YouTube bloggers, learning from TEDx speakers, learning from Instagram celebrities, learning from performers on television, learning from radio jockeys, learning from students, learning from Jugaad, and basically I have done less teaching and a lot of learning during the pandemic. And I think it has enriched humanities, and along with Dr. Sundar Sarkar, now we've started barefoot.org, which is completely a virtual space for teaching, discussing philosophy. And we just joined, we started Barefoot Chat yesterday, which was with the TIFR Mumbai, which is a platform for discussion of philosophy. It's completely virtual, and we had about 60 participants yesterday discussing what is seen. So it's kind of, people are adapting, and I think although we can wait for pandemic to be over, I think somewhere we need to be just written this down. We need to be gentle with ourselves, and I think also this whole idea that everything should get done within the time given to us and right now before the pandemic ends. I think if you just sit back and say it's okay to do a little less chapters, it's okay. Some other time maybe. I mean, if we die, a little bit of stepping back from the kind of use up every minute and hear every word and listen to everything with attention. If we just give ourselves the ability to be human as a philosopher, I think it makes it much more easier. And this I'm sharing just from my heart and experience. I'm not doing any theorization here. But I think that is the kind of classrooms we need to have.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ram. I hope I've kept within my time.
No, you have, and you've expanded the time actually, Meera. Thank you very much. There's a lot to learn from Madam. You are Akashvani. So you have, I think that there is something to that, and the idea that our students are a lot more inventive and imaginative than we always give them credit for, or whichever way it is. I think that there is a lot to be learned from your experiences, and thank you for sharing so openly with all of us. I think we have actually, this is unfortunate and this is the first time it's happened, but we've lost Professor Manoj Maji from Guwahati. He's still not managed to come on, and his phone is switched off. And I suspect it's not that it's switched off, but it's just now become inaccessible. We'll just go ahead now with Professor Aseem Siddiqui from Aligarh Muslim University. Professor Siddiqui teaches English at the university, and his experiences of teaching at a large central university in UP, that would be very valuable to hear. So, Professor Siddiqui.
Thank you very much, sir. Ours is a very old department, and the department is also very big, in the sense that we are teaching number of courses, and we also have a student from different places. So last semester, when this problem came up, suddenly it was a kind of challenge, and but I somehow considered it a kind of opportunity also, because whenever in our usual classrooms I teach, so usually we don't have enough time at our disposal, because we are bound by timetable, we are bound by a certain schedule. But since the last semester we had lot of time, and the students also had lot of time, so I could be very, very flexible with classes. I could meet them at a stretch for 2-3 sessions on Zoom. And would you believe that I ended up teaching 80 sessions on Zoom? In normal course, I don't think I would have had that much time. And in normal course, I'm also sure that students also had to attend other classes, so normally they also could not have spared that much time for me. I'm talking about some advantages also, and I'll come back to some other things also. And gradually, as I started teaching, fortunately, connectivity problem did not, it was not there, and it did not create any disturbance as such. I mean, of course, there were some minor issues occasionally, but by and large, since most of my students came from cities, and a majority of them were based in Aligarh, they were day scholars. So that way, there was usually a sizable number in the classroom. And gradually, I saw that it is not only my students, but some of my former students, some of my younger colleagues, they also started attending those classes. So usually the number in those classes was around 80 or 85. As Ben just pointed out, that I could see that students were more regular in these classes. So that way, I found it a kind of opportunity. Now here, I must say that these online classes pose a kind of challenge before us, and especially in humanities, in literature, the challenge is simply very, very, great. We usually understand English as a very one-dimensional kind of subject, that we are teaching language, or we are teaching just a few poems of Wordsworth and Shelley. But actually, the subject English has expanded. We are talking about social sciences there, we are talking about philosophy there, we are talking about theory there. And in fact, literature is just, 50% of the syllabus. Otherwise, there are other things. So here also, one can say there are lots of lectures, good lectures available on YouTube. So if I'm teaching Shakespeare, there are very good lectures available on Shakespeare by some experts, by some Shakespeare experts, say from Harvard, from Oxford. But at the end of the day, I'm teaching my students, and I'm not giving them those prepared lectures, those structured lectures. Rather, I'm teaching them, and I'm teaching my students, and my students are listening to me. I'm looking at their problems. So maybe those excellent lectures are there on YouTube, but those lectures are not that useful, because I know my student and my student know me. They want to interact with me. So that means this issue that you have all possible material on internet, it also has a kind of limited value, because it does not mean that my job is any less challenging. And here it also means that probably a teacher has to be very well prepared to teach in these online classes. You know that Google already tested, our knowledge. Google already tested our interpretive skill. Google already tested teachers. And now, since we are talking about online teaching, so naturally it means that we need to do much more than simply say talk to our students. So their selection of some important lectures may be important. Say it is important for us to select good readings, and it is important for us to actually engage a student very meaningfully, because we also have a lot of time, and we also have fortunately time. We always complain that we didn't have enough time. So fortunately now we can make very good use of this time. Actually, I don't see as much problem in teaching. I see that there is a greater problem as far as evaluation is concerned. Let me just explain this. So when I say that teaching is not as much a problem, it means that I can interact with my students at any time. The time schedule is flexible. If there is this problem of connectivity, then I can certainly try other modes. I can say use WhatsApp. I can talk to them on telephone. So that means teaching is not an issue as such. But certainly there is that political issue involved, because the moment you record your lectures, the moment your lectures are there on Zoom, the moment you share those lectures, they are archived. And you know that classroom is a kind of social space. It's a very democratic kind of space. We are talking about different things. We are communicating not only through our words, we are also communicating through our gestures. We are communicating through our facial expressions. But maybe in an online lecture, once it is archived, a very small part of this lecture can be used against you. I'm giving you one example. So day before yesterday, I was discussing one letter written by Saadat Hasan Manto. This is a letter written to Uncle Sam. It's a hilarious letter, but we see lots of problems there, because Manto, he was an Indian writer, then he migrated to Pakistan, and then in that letter he is also talking about certain issues in a satirical manner, in a humorous manner. So maybe humor can get lost, satire can get lost, and something is interpreted literally, and it can lead you in all sorts of problems. And the challenge is especially, say, great in case of social sciences and humanities, where anything can be quoted in a different context. And sometimes you can also, and maybe sometimes a very different kind of issue can come up. You have a slip of tongue, instead of say talking about Derrida, you end up say talking about Foucault. And by the time you correct yourself that, oh, I was talking about Derrida, not Foucault. So the damage is done, because somebody might say that, oh, he doesn't know, this is what Foucault has said and not Derrida. So that means this kind of surveillance is very problematic. It can be very problematic, because in our usual classrooms, say, the space is very, very democratic. And other things about this is that usually if we think about our own teachers, how we learn from our teachers, I'm sure that most of us will remember the form of the teaching. That means what our teachers taught, we will remember the form of their teaching. We might have forgotten the content of their teaching. So I may not remember, say, how, what my teacher taught me, but I remember how my teacher spoke, how my teacher communicated with me, how my teacher interacted with me. So that means the form of teaching is as important as probably the content of teaching. And here we are also missing that form. So here probably this problem can be addressed by asking at least some of our students to keep their videos on. Because if I am speaking to a blank screen, my motivation level is not as good. I need to communicate with my students, and I must know that if I have said something humorous, then they have received that. So that is important. And if I can share some tips, one tip is that maybe some of the students can keep their videos on, even if there are just 2-3 students who have their videos on in the classroom. Probably the quality of my lecture, the quality of my interaction will be better. And similarly, the class can be probably less teacher-centric. You know, we should not forget this fact that our students are digital natives. We are just immigrants, but they are digital natives. So they know much more about internet. They know much more about things online. So probably involving them or making them involving them and asking them to do more things. So that is one important thing, and we have to forget this fact that the class should be teacher-centric. And similarly, we must engage them properly. We must give them proper readings. And here it means that teacher's job has actually expanded. It has not become less, because selecting proper readings is important. And of course, there is something else also about this, that as far as the subject English is concerned, it is a misnomer. We are, say, discussing films, we are discussing, say, different texts, we are discussing, say, all kinds of social texts. So probably this also gives us an opportunity to engage a student more meaningfully, and they can probably bring those texts. So our lectures can be supplemented by these things. Now, the greatest problem is evaluation. And I'll say that this is also a law and order issue. Most of our universities, most of our educational institutions face problems of law and order. I don't think that there can be any teacher who is as brave as to fail all students of his or her class on their bad performance, because that day the teacher will be suspended by the authorities. So that means here also, this year we were very, very lax. Most universities were very, very lax. Most universities were over liberal in awarding their students. So okay, we can ask them to write assignments, but here also it is important that we should not ask them to write a lot. Rather, if we ask them to write on something very, very focused, not much, but rather the emphasis should be on, say, quality. But at the end of the day, evaluation is a serious problem. One way out is, say, open book examinations, which has been tried by different universities. And this also means that we need to invest in teacher training also, because, say, our teachers are not trained into, say, making those kinds of questions. Our teachers are also not trained into, say, testing students in this manner, say, where they have simply written assignments and where they have all possible sources at their command. They don't sit in the traditional examination hall and write their examination papers. And we'll have to think about certain methods, certain foolproof methods, how we can evaluate the performance of our students, because evaluation remains a very important issue. But I think that this particular problem is of temporary nature, and maybe after, say COVID-19 probably is, we overcome that, say, medical problem, maybe we'll return to classrooms and but certainly this phase has given us some lessons. So I don't think that online teaching is simply a temporary thing. It is something which is there to stay. It will remain there and it will supplement our traditional teaching. And I just think about a possible situation. We often have to go to different places for some kind of official work where we leave our students in classes behind, and we also feel guilty that, okay, we have not given sufficient time to our students and we took leave. So in this kind of setup, or with this kind of advantage, we can be anywhere and we can engage our student, even if we are on duty leave, we are doing some other work elsewhere, some official work, important that it may be. So I think these are the things I wanted to share, and my students actually responded very well last semester. But this semester I see that gradually the novelty is also wearing off. So I don't see that kind of enthusiasm which I saw in the last semester. And you know that teacher is also sometimes a kind of magician. जो एक मदारी होता है, डुगडुगी बजाता है, तो we have to try different tricks to bring back student to even our online classes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Siddiqui. I mean, you again highlighted different aspects of this problem, and I'm particularly glad that you spoke about the advantages of this new methodologies and mediums, and how you were able to give a lot more time. And particularly, we need to have more teacher training. In some sense, what we are trying to do with these panel discussions, etc., is to at least highlight some of the problems, and we kind of hope that this will provide, if not exact training, at least you can come and listen to what your colleagues are doing. The kind of humility that is required for teachers to also admit that we don't know. And we don't know exactly how to cope with this. As Meera pointed out, she spent a lot more time learning than she has. There is a lot for us to learn. And there's not just from each other, from our students, from the medium, from the difficulties that we have. But it's also pretty clear we're all very committed to teaching. And we are actually bothered about how are we going to be able to reach our students? Okay, so whenever people view the teaching profession, they shouldn't forget this, that the degree of commitment that we have is actually very, very high, and most of us are in fact bothered about this question of kaise samjhaye. And kaise samjhe. Both of them are equally important for us, right? Okay. So the one new thing that we've learned this time is that you choose your panel, your panel members, keeping some things in mind, and some of them are swallowed up by the internet or swallowed up by circumstance. I think we have to give up on Professor Manoj Majhi from the IIT Guwahati. So let that be a lesson to everybody. Not all the IITs have got wonderful internet connections, and not everyone is communicating at the speed of light. When they are of course, but otherwise we have problems there as well. No, I'm actually sort of somewhat upset because the dimension that Manoj was bringing to this discussion is how does one teach creativity, where where the sort of the face-to-face engagement in whichever form is just so important, because one teaches by example in many such situations. Well, maybe we'll get him on another day on another panel. And let me just switch now to the Q&A section of our meeting today. It's just going to be as long as it is. So, Madhu, would you like to just take over? And
there are plenty of questions from the YouTube. There is a very animated conversation happening in the chat out there. The first couple of questions are very general, like, what should be the preparation for both teachers and students before starting a class in humanities? What would be your tips for the same?
The way in which we could do this is, I don't want to go around and say, what do you think? We just one of you to answer. So let me just start out by asking Meera. Please just, would you all unmute yourself so long as you are not in the middle of some extremely noisy environment, and then we can just have a conversation.
I think
would you just answer that question?
Yeah. So one of the best tips I can give is that class preparation is very different for, because as Professor was pointing out, the time is very different in virtual world. The student, the screen time attention of students is lower, because in a classroom you can just say, hey, wake up, don't listen to me. You can't do that on screen. So what I think I followed what is called the Pomodoro technique. Like, everybody can listen for 20 minutes. You can do a class, you can do your lecture, you can do your regular show, the slides, everything. And I think you have to figure out every student classroom has its own attention span. So by the second or third, you will start to see people, like if you ask a question, suddenly nobody will, you say, all of you raise your hands, all of you type hello in the chat, and then you realize how many students are actually paying attention. So that's one way of catching their attention, and then you realize what their attention span is. So after every 15 minutes, I'll play classical music and say, take a break, go drink water, walk around, it's okay. Come back, and the music ends, come back. And that gave them, so the style of locking up, I mean, we don't have a captive audience, let's be clear. So in a classroom, they're trapped to listen to us. And now is the real challenge for us to see whether we are real good pedagogues. The second thing is, the second tip is, please watch YouTube channel videos on people who teach crafts, people who teach drawing on YouTube, because they are actually teaching painting on YouTube. I learned painting, watercolor painting, using somebody on the way your camera is fixed, the way your face appears. So this is a wrong angle where I'm actually holding. So somebody, a photographer told me this is the correct angle. I'm actually lifting my laptop up. This is the correct angle, right? And then for a long time, I was teaching on my iPad. I couldn't figure out where the camera is. So I was looking here and talking. Whereas the camera was somewhere else. So I put a little arrow mark there. So learn, don't be afraid of technology. That's one thing. Watch other people teach, and not your colleagues also, but just these people who regularly teach on teaching. Prepare, I prepare cards. I started doing these little cards because you're large, huge. See, you're in a normal classroom, it's very interesting. In a normal classroom, you can have a book in front of you, but here the laptop is in front of you. So it's very difficult to, like, you know, I have this huge book, philosophy book with me, and philosophy and humanities, we have these books. And so if I'm trying to read from the book, it's going to be very difficult. So this is a huge book. So have a system of cards or notes or whatever. These are all very practical tips. And I think most of all, I think we have to have an open mind. I think trying to not look for problems, but to try and work through the solution. मैं दिख रही हूँ, मैं सुन रही हूँ, that's not, it happens every time. Am I audible? Am I audible? So that's so we have to learn to say that regularly.
No, but I'm beginning to feel that, you know, I'll verify that everybody is audible and visible before the session starts, and then, you know, please don't ask me again. If you are not audible, I will tell you, and I will tell you very rudely that you are not audible. Okay, next question, please, Madhu.
Yes, and the next question is about how do you deal with teaching delicate topics online, given that the students are at home. This was a point that was raised by one of you. So,
Shukla actually raised that. Shukla, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so how do you actually cope with, X-rated, you mentioned that you had, say, adult content, let's say, that you have to beam into your classroom, then what do you do?
So in any case, as I said, teaching live has actually been very difficult. We not only have students from across different geographical locations in India, but, you know, our students are spread across the world. In my class, I may have students from Amsterdam, Bangladesh. I may have a student from, most of them have gone back home. So we're actually trying to coordinate classes across time zones as well. So the best thing for us has been to actually upload material in the form of a lecture that they can download, which they can see as and when it's convenient for them. And then do group discussions at a later point in time, at a time that is convenient to everybody mutually. So that's one way of doing this. And the other thing is that, we are also, again, when we talk about students in JNU, almost 40 to 50% are from below poverty line. I mean, this is something that we haven't really understood, that many of these students have actually come into the university, have come in from the Navodaya school system. They've actually never been in a home environment for maybe 10 odd years. Even as schooling has happened in Navodaya school systems or boarding school systems for, tribal children or whatever. So for them, it's actually been very difficult to go back home and study in a place where they, they may have had to go out of the house. They might have had to go up to some hillock or something, as Meera pointed out, to just get access, right? So this is again something that it just makes sense. But again, because so much of our material is heavy on images, heavy on, cinema's files. These are very heavy files. To even transmit them, live is very difficult. So we actually just find it easier to send the material across so that they can download it as and when they have connectivity, and then do, sessions later.
Okay. But actually, one is visual material, but sometimes if it is sensitive textual material. So, Professor Siddiqui, आप कुछ कहेंगे?
Actually, I had live classes because I met my student at a scheduled time. Say I'll meet every day at 12 o'clock, and after teaching a particular subject, maybe after delivering 10 or so lectures, I made those recordings available to students, both in video form as well as in audio form. So that means I somehow had a feel of a proper class if I met the student at one particular time, at appointed time. Okay, I'll meet them at 12 o'clock, and students also attended those classes. So even if all of them could not attend those classes, so they could always access those video lectures or audio lectures at a later time.
No, but how did you deal with having to discuss sensitive material, either of a political or any nature, how does one deal? You already raised this issue that surveillance is there and that you can feel, that it's not as easy.
There actually we have a problem. So sometimes usually at such time we tend to self-censor ourselves. Mm-hmm. And this happens actually. And
it can go to ridiculous lengths as well, in the sense, for example, I have a student who is from a region that has disappeared underwater because of the dam building activities in Pakistan and India after partition. She actually is from Mirzapur, which is now like Bilaspur, it is underwater. And she wants to study its material culture. Right? Now, how do you actually even study the material culture of a region that does not exist on a map anymore without actually discussing maps that would be disputed both by two political nations today? So here are the kind of difficulties that you face, and then you say, okay, fine, we'll face the consequences as and when we have to, because, we're talking about a university where really everything should be allowed to be discussed.
True, but the thing is that the vulnerable are always more vulnerable than, and we have to worry a little about that. But as I think, many people, depending on the discipline that you're talking about, self-censorship is becoming, unfortunately, all too common. Even light-hearted jokes cannot be said because they can be taken out of context, as Professor Siddiqui already pointed out. Okay, Madhu?
Yeah, I think the final statement you made kind of bridges the two things. One comment was that, remember, Big Brother is always watching, the Orwellian attitude. Mm-hmm. What the teachers were commenting there. Speaking of humor, a question is, how do you replicate the warmth and humor of a classroom in an online class?
Okay. Giridhar.
Can I just come in?
Yes.
I think I'll just narrate one example. So one day I was in the midst of a class and I was talking, actually I was narrating one joke. So, but at that very moment, what happened that the time for Zoom ended and I was in the midst of that joke. So a student WhatsApp me, sir, what happened later? What happened? Right. So that means it is not a problem as such. If we are talking to a student and they are following us, so even humor can be communicated.
Sure. Any special thing, Giridhar, would you add?
Pretty much it works as a strategy, and students are kind enough to say ha in the chat box. So
okay.
It's working. I think people come back to you, and if there is a point to the humor that can be discussed a little later, people do that as well. I have found students do make the effort, realizing the difficulty of the whole medium and the whole interaction. So it has been a positive matter. Yeah. The jokes don't fall flat simply because you're telling it to a rectangle.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one thing, right, where Meera was talking about learning from crafts and learning from theatre. But if you're not used to performing to a laptop, how do you actually deliver the joke? As a teacher, how do you actually manage to do that? Is I think the bigger question.
No, I think both Professor Siddiqui and Giridhar have pointed out that having a few of your class, few of the people, if you're doing a live class, have a few people, just insist on them having their videos on so that you can see that there is a face, and maybe you tell that person the joke and take it from there.
On a more serious note, the question is, how do you ensure that the student participation is real? Like, they could be proxy attendance, or they could just log in and go away. How do you ensure that the students are there and you engage?
Actually, sometimes students use very, say, strange kind of IDs. So, for example, there was one hedonistic soul in my class. I said, okay, I don't know who this hedonistic soul is. Please say sign in your name. It becomes especially important when we are, say, having examinations or conducting viva voce here.
Yeah.
I think one way of ensuring attendance is not to have evaluation. I find that when I run my reading groups, everybody attends because there's no evaluation to be had at the end of it. We're very happy to participate in all these reading groups, and we really enjoy ourselves.
Is there a right time for the classes to be conducted in terms of student engagement?
There definitely is. Because if your department gives you a certain timetable, so that means your classes are supposed to start at a particular point of time. So that way, some kind of discipline is also ensured, and students also have that sense of discipline. Okay, we have a class at this time, and say after 15 minutes or so, there is somebody else who will take this class. So that is important here.
Okay. So, which part of the day, mornings, afternoons, is there a specific time? Because I think some of us have found it comfortable to conduct the classes during the mornings.
I think unless the institution forces you to follow a particular timetable, it also depends again on the type of students you're teaching. For example, rural students, between 11 and 4, in most villages, power is cut off, and they switch on the power in the evening or in the morning for the irrigation pumps to run. So depending on the nature of your student classrooms, I think my classes went on very well between 6 to 8, but that's a Doordarshan attentive time. I think we should learn from television, because I think the prime time is the time when you are most attentive. And so for me, 6 to 8 every day worked, because I would give them the reading in the morning, and I know by some time during the day they will have read something, and by 6 to 8 they came to class. At the same time, in Manipal University, on the other hand, students turn up like clockwork on Microsoft Teams, and there's attendance, there's a whole regulated process that goes on. So there's no choice. But even there, if there's a problem, we can reschedule the class to a more convenient time. Like if an entire set of batch of students is finding it difficult, or not having power or fund or something.
It's an institutional thing, because it is the department which sets a timetable or schedule here, basically.
The one other question is, how do you ensure a holistic understanding from the student side instead of fragmented one when you have an online class, because there is no way to really know what the student is learning?
One strategy that we at Azim Premji University are using is that every third class or fourth class is a recap class. It functions in lieu of office hours kind of thing. So that recap class is actually designed to connect the various modules, various units that you are doing, so that there is some sort of continuity for the students to see the argument running through the course.
Here also, if the class is not as teacher-centric as it usually is, and if students are involved in different activities, So you can see that, okay, they are taking interest. And what I did last semester was that, because this was also kind of opportunity, so I invited some of my friends from other universities, say from Calcutta University, say from Delhi, say from Hyderabad, say from Allahabad University, and I asked a student to conduct a seminar. So after I taught a particular unit, I asked them to conduct a seminar, and there I invited, say, some of my friends from other universities. So that actually also had a touch of novelty, and student motivation level was very good. That, okay, they wanted to show to, say, some of my friends, okay, that they are good. And in fact, it was good for my friends also. So that way, in fact, I mean, we try sometimes different kinds of strategies in the classroom so that the motivation level of the students remain high.
The last question from this collection is regarding evaluation. Like, how is there any specific tool that you would like to be implemented for evaluation, and what are the best tools for evaluating students in humanities?
I think that is institutional silence. I think that's an institutional silence, because all of us teachers know that somewhere we are governed by the rules and regulations of the institutions. But ideally, I think evaluation should be self-evaluation. Ideally, I think students must actually, if we give them what they should have learned, like by the end of this, I think the reason is somewhere we've gone content-based on our evaluation about how much we know rather than what we know. And I think if self-evaluation is happening, and also, when self-evaluation happens, we don't teach critical thinking. So students say, I feel, I don't like, I like. So that's the kind of, even the kind of feedback we receive for ourselves when we are teaching. So I think self-evaluation is the way to go, but to self-evaluate, they must be taught how they should evaluate themselves. Otherwise, they'll all give themselves full marks or give themselves 0 marks.
Or they tell you what they think you want you to hear.
Yes, that is also true.
And so here also actually, say evaluation, as was pointed out, that it is an institutional thing. And in fact, different institutions actually diluted the entire process of evaluation. Because of course, in some classes, there were very good lectures, but maybe some teachers, they were not able to manage certain things. And so institutions even say allowed the evaluation on WhatsApp or trying very different kinds of platforms. So here you can see that different institutions actually diluted this type of evaluation. And we can understand this better by a very funny kind of thing. Say one student who passed the examination, he said that I want to become a doctor and I want to say have a vaccine of corona. And his father said, you passed the examination because of corona.
Okay.
And you are thinking about vaccine of corona.
I think some of the general principles of, sorry.
Please go.
Some of the general principles of evaluation continue to be completely useful in the online mode as well, namely multiple kinds of evaluation, right? So that students with different skills can contribute to their, can show their learning. Because you would not set the only assignments would be essays. That doesn't give an advantage or doesn't showcase the learning of students from other kinds of backgrounds. Similarly, I think in this case also, multiple kinds of evaluations ranging from short essays to longer forms to presentations to maybe designing a project or something. I think those continue to have a lot of value in the current mode as well.
Well, okay, that sort of brings us to the end of today's session. Let me thank all of you panelists for sharing of yourselves so freely and generously. There's been sort of good discussions. One could take 2 points of view, and one is that why single out the humanities over any other kind of teaching? see, different subjects have their own dynamics, and one will definitely agree that teaching medicine purely online will have some limitations. So as Dr. Siddiqui just pointed out, many of us are going to be viewing those who graduated in the Corona years with a slightly different amount of trust, depending on what their skill sets are supposed to be. But that apart, sometimes teaching a subject where there's a lot of equations, or there is some description of some phenomena or something, can have its own advantages, let's say, in comparison to a subject where the transmission of ideas, where the nuances of expression, where that kind of feedback is or has hitherto been so important in the entire process of teaching. And what's pretty clear is that we are learning, we are adapting, we are finding solutions which are not perfect. But as Meera pointed out, perhaps we don't have to be perfect. We can live with a certain amount of imperfection in the teaching part of it. But one can also do as well as one can, and then at least hope that the efforts will get rewarded in one way. Let me close now saying that, next week we will come back with another one of our hands-on sessions of training how to evaluate, because we alternately run these sessions of different kinds of software, different kinds of tools that people are using. Some are adapted to STEM, some are more useful in non-STEM subjects, and so on. But we will come back and have a discussion on how to teach, for example, mathematics, which is little different from humanities, different from sciences, different from social sciences, and maybe we'll explore how to do some of these other subjects in subsequent panel discussions. Let me again invite all of you who are just tuning in, please subscribe to the DFOT discussion group. Let your colleagues know about DFOT. This is more to spread the word that there is such a thing. This is a place where you could find answers to some questions. You can pose questions, get help from others, and give help. Most importantly, give help and suggestions to others, and therefore, and thereby help all of us swim through this the ocean of pandemia as we go through this rather choppy sea. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.